I don't know.
Hey, Bruce. High five. How you doing?
Hey, Dan.
Yes, yeah. Just got here. Haven't seen anybody but you. That's not you, man. Hey, if she's looking for you, I'll let her know that we met. What in the world?
How this goes.
Yeah. Don't shoot.
Oh, how you doing?
I don't know. Thanks for asking. Man, I haven't been in here in a long time.
No, I have not seen any either of you.
Hi.
Hi, I met you at the Melching meeting.
I think write it down.
No, don't. I don't like being recorded. No. I'll write it down for you. I'll give you my card. How's that? And
That'll
then.
be cool.
All right, this is kind of bad, but if you have any trouble finding it, this is our website. You probably know that. And then.
It's been a while. It's so busy.
Yeah. And so we're trying to post current information up there for the public to look at, the latest reports and things. So see if that helps answer some questions. Yeah, absolutely.
But do you suppose that there may be a meeting sometime in the future?
If we have something, something big's happening, definitely. But at this point, really, it's kind of status quo, and we're really not doing a whole lot right now. So
Okay, well, thanks a lot.
we don't want to waste people's time. So.
Well,
Thanks for asking.
I'm getting
Thanks
used
for being
to that.
here tonight.
Thank you, yeah.
It's really exciting.
Well, doggone it. What happened?
Came over and examined his backpack.
Really? Oh, well, I guess why not, right? Hey, did you get that stuff out of there? Funny, huh? Yeah, we'll all get arrested now. Huh. Well, I guess you can't be too safe. Right? I mean, that's what they say. What if they like to look at his?
Okay, that's 7 now.
What's that?
He has his cap in his hand. There's 6 caps of this, so that's $7.
7. Yeah, you count them, boy.
7.
Well, you know what? This gal here, Heidi, recognized me when she came in. Did she? Well, you know something? I asked her what was happening with the meeting, because they were going to have a meeting, and she goes, well, if anything big ever develops, we'll have a meeting, but the way it is right now, nothing's just status quo. And I said, well, you think we ever will have a meeting? She goes, no, if. She says, there's a website, where we're putting information up on there for people. And I said, well, hey, Joe, good to see you, man. Hey, you look a lot better than your cousin. Yeah. Well, so anyway, I said, look, I tell you, she says, the website, and I went to write it down, Roger, the website address. Yeah. And I said, well, look, I tell you what, can I record this? How about if I just record it then? So I don't have to write it down. She goes, oh, please don't record. No. I don't like being recorded. Oh, no, she's got the hide. I don't like being recorded. Don't like the truth getting out. What in the world is this? Got a prize fighter here. Oh, man. And then she ends the conversation by saying, I don't want to waste your time. She wasn't going to promise a meeting because she doesn't want to waste my time. Can you imagine that? I said, I'm getting used to it. Yeah, it's Heidi Hollenbach. Sounds like Christmas candy. Yeah. Now I'm going to shut this off. I'm running on battery power. I'll have to be quick on the draw, though, if things develop. I didn't search anybody. You don't want to search anybody? I don't know. Depends on what they're carrying. Yeah. It was good enough for him. I was wondering why you didn't search that guy's bag. I walked in behind it.
He searched my bag.
He did? No, he didn't. Hey, Matt, who searched you? Which one searched your bag?
The lady.
The one over over there?
I was telling her, it's a good thing they sent her, because if they had sent one of these, like, nasty-looking pigs,
Did you get in touch with that Boulder? Yes, I did.
I got a question for you.
Well, I might have an answer.
I think you were the only one who would have an answer. I understand that you searched a friend of mine's bag, which only makes sense these days because it might be carrying a bomb, right? He's got long hair and he's young. Well, I walked in, well, I'm telling you, I walked right past you, and the guy ahead of me had a bag. And I was telling my friend Roger in there, I said, I didn't search him, look at him. And Roger says, I didn't search my bag either, you got a bag too. So how come you just searching one guy's bag?
No, we've looked at other people's bags.
Well, you didn't just look at anybody else's bag as far as I know, just that one.
No, Chuck's might have been coming in.
Are you interested in looking at any other bags? I can point them out for you.
Do you have Cynthia's number? Price, phone number?
No, I don't.
That's it. Okay.
I guess you're not interested in them, huh?
It's a government employee. It's against state of Michigan.
Yeah, I gave it to her. A lot of double talk. Yeah, had a big smile. You know, she's been practicing that all day.
Here's a question that's an easy one, for me at least. How do you spell Heidi's last name? My last name is spelled Hollenbeac.
How do you spell Halliburton?
What's that?
How do you spell Halliburton?
Not that
I'll take the first question. How much of this gas from a fracking well will stay in Michigan? Because we only have 20% production in Michigan, 100% will stay in Michigan. That's where are we going to send it? If it's right here, it's either going to go to the cogen plant in Midland or it's going to go to the Calcasieu plant that then will go into No, they sell to the closest buyer. So it'll either be DTE or Consumers Power usually provide that gas, and they're the local utilities.
Okay, question. With so many cuts to state and federal budgets, and the past history of accidents like BP, Enbridge, and Exxon Valdez, what makes you think regulations will be enforced and or accidents will not happen? The regulations are in place to minimize or eliminate accidents from happening. There's no guarantees that nothing bad will happen. Our view on things is if proper regulations are in place, proper oversight is taking place, and that standard operating practices are undertaken, those will all work together to minimize the potential for spills to occur. With that said, there's no guarantees. Things break, people make mistakes. There's no guarantees. I'm sorry, my name is Bill Mitchell. I'm with the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals. I'm an area geologist in the Kalamazoo District. My area is the seven counties in the southwest corner of the state.
Got a question here. In September 2008, the Chronicle detailed how DEQ could no longer do on-site inspections for wetlands permits. How are we to believe regulations are being followed if things were in this condition before the recession? Good question. I can speak for the DEQ Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals. The DEQ's been going through funding issues as long as I've been involved with it. The Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals, let me back up. About 10 years ago, the DEQ had quite a bit of general fund funding, and that's been converted more to user-based fees where you have restricted funds for each of the DEQ programs, because we can no longer rely on the legislature providing funding for these programs. Now, they have, and some of that funding's been coming back, but the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals has an oil and gas fund, an orphan well fund. These are restricted funds, and in the case of my programs, the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals determines what level of staffing and expenses we're going to need for the ensuing year. And then we also work with Treasury, and we estimate how much oil and gas is going to be produced that year, tracking trends. So it can be a little tricky because we can be off on this, but the fund carries a balance of $7 million, and we charge the oil and gas industry what we think a modifier, what we think we're going to have to charge them with what we're predicting for oil and gas to fund that program for the year. And then they're assessed that fee. It's called a surveillance fee. It's much like the wetlands program. It's more dynamic than like the wetlands programs and some of these fee-based programs like landfill. They may have a set fee that they're depending on, but if something changes, like retirement costs that the state incurs, like pre-funding retirement, they can't just automatically increase the fee astronomically, say for like a wetlands permit or a landfill permit. But at least in the case of the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals, we can charge the industry what we think it's going to take to run the program for the year.
Question, when was the first high-volume hydraulic fractured deep shell well released in Michigan? I believe that was 2008 is when the company started leasing for that, and eventually drilled in 2010. So there's a couple of years lag between when they take leases and two drilling wells.
Earthquakes in Ohio, earthquakes in Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and other places, not in Michigan, can fracking lead to earthquakes. The fracking process, the completion process, I believe there's only one study completed in British Columbia where seismic activity has been associated with the completion process of fracking. The Ohio earthquakes, which were mentioned earlier during the presentation, were caused by the injection of waste fluids. It was not. They could have been fracking fluids that they were disposing of, but it was not the completion process of fracking. Onward, Muskegon County has numerous contaminated sites around the county. Taxpayers are paying the bill for some of these cleanup sites into the state. Oil and chemical companies said, trust us. Why should we trust them this time? Michigan law dictates that if companies who contaminate soil and groundwater are responsible to clean it up. Companies do go bankrupt. That's the law. Companies are responsible if they contaminate the soil and groundwater to clean it up. If they go bankrupt, that's another story. Orphan well program in Michigan has been, over time, we've plugged hundreds of wells that were abandoned by companies that were not plugged properly, that were not plugged at all or plugged properly. Some of these sites, there is remnant contamination associated with that, and we are working with the funds that are provided by that to clean up these contaminated sites. Oil and gas companies put funds into the orphan well fund to keep it solvent, to plug these abandoned wells, and to clean up historic contamination associated with the oil and gas activities.
Right.
Got a question here. Has the state, Congress, or the governor put law behind, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but
What?
information or things being pumped into state waters? I think this person's asking what's being done to ensure that that wastewater is not being put into our freshwater resources. This person stated that we have the most fresh water of any state in the union. We have precious water resources. Contamination, and asking sort of what about the Pennsylvania contamination. Can you guys hear me all right if I get that away from you? The principal way that oil and gas wastewater is disposed of in Michigan is these injection wells. I alluded to 700 injection wells that we have around the state. There's slightly different geology over in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and they don't have the ability to dispose of water like we have. So through necessity, they're recycling nearly 100% of their water. They've had about 6,000 or 7,000 of these long horizontals to our 12 I think, long horizontals. So from the oil and gas side, there's no incentive to back up to a stream while you're getting a sandwich and open a valve and dump it into the water because they can do it legally. We authorize these wells regularly, and the EPA authorizes them as well. In Ohio and Pennsylvania, they did have instances of this, waste haulers, Wild West, and my understanding from reading what you all read is they've had a hard time keeping track of those. And I don't believe that's going to be an issue here in Michigan. He says it already has been, so we'll go there. I assume he's talking about brine disposal. We had an incident last summer, last spring, in northern Michigan. The state has a process of approving brine for disposal, or brine for use on roads for dust control. The DEQ, DNR at that time in the early 80s had proposed that we do away with using produced water from oil and gas sites as a source for brine, because there is low levels, there's the salt content obviously that binds and keeps the dust down, but there's low levels of hydrocarbon involved in it, there's low levels of radiation and other components. The county road commissions immediately challenged the state on that basis, and they won in court. So since 1983, or 83 or 86, not important, but the state has had to have a process of approving produced water brines that are eligible for just disposal or spreading on roads for dust control. The Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals will review that analytical and either approve it or deny it based on the parameters in that court order. We have another portion of the DEQ and the Water Resources Division, I believe, that actually runs that dust control program. Now, last year, one of the Encana wells in northern Michigan, they had submitted their waste hauler. They had submitted analytical to put the flowback water or produced water from that well. It's been on production for a year to get that approved for disposal on the roads. That had the appearance of being produced water, not frack water, based on the chloride content. It met the parameters, and it was approved by our office. It was approved by DEQ, and it was spread on roads. It was immediately brought to our attention after it had been spread on roads in northern Michigan, near a campground, on I believe a lumber yard, a gravel. So Encana's waste hauler had that water approved and began spreading it for dust control based on that approval. Controversy revolving around hydraulic fracturing and chemicals that may have been used in that, we immediately put a moratorium on that. We said we weren't going to use flowback water from brine well or from hydraulically fractured wells as dust control. And we didn't say how long we were going to do that, but we certainly wanted to study it and we wanted to get more information. So for the time being, we're not approving that. We're not approving disposal wells that may have received frack water as sources, approved sources for dust control. In response to that, we also went out and tested these roads. We tested the brine that was spread, and it was within criteria. There was no action levels in anything in that water, and no threat to the human health. But for the time being, we're not using hydraulic fracture flowback fluid or produced water from a well that's been hydraulically fractured for the dust control.
Let's see. Michigan Congress insisting that we know what is being pumped into our water system. Why won't the oil tell us what the chemicals are being used? I'm going to interpret this a little bit to infer that they're asking about disclosure of chemicals and fracking fluids. Companies are required to submit to us the material data safety sheets for all of the chemicals that are used within the fracking fluids. There are some proprietary chemicals that companies have developed, spent time and money, that those specific chemicals, there's a material data safety sheet for the product as a whole that will tell what the hazards are for that country. So in case of emergency response actions, the emergency responders will know how to react to emergency situations. But companies are required to submit the chemicals that are in the fracturing fluids.
How can you check? You don't even have it. How do you verify it?
I didn't understand.
Clarification?
So they do not have to disclose the price, or is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
So we don't know.
The MSDS sheets do not contain each individual proprietary chemical that may be in that fluid. That's what I alluded to. The companies are saying if you can't put it in there, don't use it.
How do you know what they're using?
Safety data sheets, we believe DEQ are adequate for our purposes for responding and emergency personnel responding to an incident. If these chemicals are spilled, you have a semi-truck rollover with chemicals incident. The safety data sheets, as in any industry, provides the information that first responders need to isolate that, shelter in place, to start cleaning it up, to get a handle on how to protect human health.
How do you verify that list is accurate?
We're gonna answer the questions on the cards.
Yeah, don't answer mine. That's to the point, man.
We don't have a verification process to verify that the safety data sheets that they're supplying for the chemicals is what it is. We don't run analytical on every chemical. I'm going to explain, we got a question here on how compulsory pooling works. This is a leasing type question, but not a DNR leasing question. What this is the size of a drilling unit varies depending on what formation you're going into, but companies, oil and gas companies, have to put together a unit that conforms with the spacing requirement, whether it's a 40 acre and 80 acre. And so the oil companies send landmen around knocking on you all's doors, asking you to sign leases. Some people make the decision to not lease. If they hold the majority of the leases in a unit, they can petition the supervisor of wells to compulsory pool people that are holding out on that unit. The reason why they do that is partly to protect the people that didn't sign. That may sound funny to you, but back in the day, the rule of capture was the law of the land, and that's where you ended up with oil and gas derricks every 40, 50 feet on little postage-sized stamps, because the rule of capture directed that if you could capture it, it was yours. Well, that creates waste, because if you don't develop an oil and gas reservoir properly, then you create waste and you damage the formation, and you don't ultimately get as much oil out of that as you could have. So this concept of correlative rights came into play, where states, government agencies could establish spacing to provide for the uniform development of these oil and gas resources. So in this case, where somebody holds out on a small parcel in this drilling unit, you're still going to be drained. If they build a unit around you and you don't sign, the oil and gas is movable. So it's still moving to the borehole from and you have a right to that. So the hearing goes, and you have the right to file an answer and come, and we do have folks that come to these hearings and respond. If you are put in these drilling units, I would say the downsides are that you don't get bonus money from the landman, and that you have to participate in the cost of the well at that point. So what that means is you're going to get the royalties and so forth that you would have gotten if you signed that lease. But the fact that you've got a compulsory pool, the company is going to ask that person participate in that well. So the royalties that would start flowing, they don't start flowing until your portion of that well is paid for. So I would say that's the downside of compulsory pooling. I encourage anybody that's being approached by a landman with these to get talk to an oil and gas attorney, get good advice on leasing.
I'll do this question that's somewhat related. Does horizontal drilling from state land to private parcels require the leasing of the private lands? The answer is not necessarily. If they're going to drill underneath those private lands, yes, they do have to have that under lease or compulsory pool, as Adam was talking about. So if the well doesn't go underneath that property, then the person doesn't have to lease the land. If the well is going to go under that property and they form a unit and compulsory pool it, then the person can still lease it up to the day the drilling begins. Most of the wells that are being drilled right now are primarily just on state land and are not going into private lands unless they've already been pooled together.
I have a couple questions that are relatively similar, so I'm going to kind of combine the questions. They both ask about water usage, and they're almost more statements than questions about water used and not being kept within the hydrologic cycle, and how that we can afford to do that. The rules are in play. I mean, this is a hard question, to answer. But from a regulatory standpoint, the water usage is regulated so that it will not have adverse effects on surface water bodies. The water withdrawal tool is used and was incorporated into the oil and gas rules when these large water withdrawals began. The questions are kind of worded as to kind of an opinion on it. It's an issue that the department does not take lightly, and we try to make sure that there are no adverse effects to surface water bodies. And that's the bulk of why the water withdrawal assessment tool is being used.
I'll take a few of them here. This question I've sort of already addressed when I was talking about the cannot spreading on roads, but this person's asking about wood carrier lot, which I believe is a business I alluded to with parking lot that was part of where that brine was, that produced water was spread. If so, when and who was notified? I mean, we caught wind of the whole thing at the same time. I said we did do analysis and we cleared this. We did not specifically test the wood carrier lot because this brine was spread on numerous locations. It's all the same material. So it was tested in some of the locations, and that's all we did with that. The question here is, do you know about the gallons of mixture that disappears when drilling? And I'm not exactly sure what this is alluding to, but if you're alluding to the hydraulic fracture fluid, all the gallons of fluid that goes down hole, I mentioned that in a lot of states you get about 30% of that flow back, water coming back to you over the first couple of years. In Michigan, what we're seeing is it's much less than the shale resources that we have, probably closer to 10%. The shale companies are actually, when they drill these with the hydraulic fracturing, they've found they get a better result. They shut in their wells for a while and they allow that water to imbibe or soak in the formation, and they get better return of gas over time. So they're seeing about 10% in Michigan. Every shale play is different. So water usage, water flow back return is different from state to state. The geology of these shale formations is different state to state, and it's even different across northern Michigan. So the answer to that question, really the short answer, is that other 90% stays in formation and may come back slowly as produced water over the life of that well, which might be anywhere from 15 to 30 years. This question is along the lines of the other one. What is the number of staffing reductions, leasing, enforcement personnel overseeing drilling activities in the last 5 years? We had a lot of retirement. So over a couple-year period there, our numbers were down. We're back staffed to where we want to be, and we've added a couple additional positions. Our orphan well program. Luke Shinneman is our district supervisor in southern Michigan here tonight. His position, we did have 2 people work in orphan well program. These guys sort of worked their way out of a job over a decade and a half, plugging wells, some of these legacy issues. So now we've kept 1 person in that program, and when Lou advanced, we converted his to a field position because we saw some increase in southern Michigan activity with a new discovery down in the Irish Hills. So we took his position, his FTE, and we moved it to a field position. My units in my section are fully staffed right now. Second part of this question, to what extent has the legislature and political pressure impacted drilling policies in the state? I've been with the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals in the last 14 months, so not a long time with OGM. But I've not seen political or legislative pressure related to this this specific issue, the hydraulic fracturing or the oil and gas. We've been operating largely as we always have, with the exception of the supervisor instruction in May 2011. And then I would say that we've been doing a lot of outreach. We've been trying to get out and answer folks' questions.
I've got one. It says, if the DEQ, and I think they meant to say DNR, took in $36 million in 2012, what was taken in profits by the industry? The state of Michigan lease for the oil and gas auction is a 1/6 lease, so we get 1/6 of the royalty. The company gets 5/6, but you have to remember that company has invested millions of dollars, or in some cases for the deep wells, billions of dollars to get that well drilled and put in the pipelines and all the infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. So they may get 5/6 of it, but they spend the money. The state of Michigan, all we do is hold the auctions and lease the land, and then that money goes into the parking down right now, previously the trust fund.
Question, when specifically have DEQ's regs been updated to reflect proper
you got 500 questions. Can't you find one you can understand?
From oversight of this new type
Of this type of high volume hydraulic fracture. As presented previously in the discussion, the implementation of the water withdrawal tool was one aspect. The requirement for the submission of the material data safety sheets. The actual laws regulating the oil and gas industry are passed by our legislators in Lansing. I believe the laws themselves have not been updated since, 1987? It's 1996. So that was the last time the actual law was readjusted. And we do go through and evaluate changes in technology and as science progresses and try to add new rules within the existing laws so that we can have proper oversight.
to clarify, that was 14 years prior to the first high volume well going in.
That's partially true. In Michigan, we had about 100 high volume hydraulic fractures. About 80 of those were the shallower interim wells that did use over 100,000 gallons of fluid. Predate I believe most of all of them predate the 1-2011 supervisor instruction, so we don't have records that relate to that supervisor instruction on those. But those 80 shallower wells, some of them were vertical, some of them were horizontal, but did use more than 100,000 gallons of either water-based or nitrogen-based fluid. Couple questions here. Fracking uses a lot of water that can't come from the village wells. What about the wildlife that would be impacted by the removal of water from creek or river? We don't allow water directly withdrawn from lakes or streams. And again, the water assessment tool that Michigan has that tracks all of these high volume, this is another definition for you, or large volume withdrawals. It's 100,000 gallons per day. There's a statute that regulates these large volume withdrawals. And the water assessment tool is a principal tool, it's a conservative tool that uses the screen to ensure that you don't impact the base flow of these streams. So that would be the principal method that we use. If it appears that the tool is indicating that they're coming up close to an adverse impact, if there's an adverse impact, it's not authorized. If it looks like they're coming close to an adverse impact, the model or the screening tool will indicate caution or a stop. And in that case, you would move to a site-specific review where additional information is required and you have to verify that your distance will work out, your pumping rates, your durations, and that has to be approved by the Water Resources Division. So that's how we ensure that. Funding is on all of you guys' mind. How will additional DEQ costs of supervision for activity be paid for? I think I've answered that.
That's right, so move on.
We have to do workload analysis, so we move people around in order to meet our metrics and accomplish the goals that we're going to do. The example of convert and lose position to a new field position was an example of that. Recognizing the increased activity in southern Michigan and the decrease in the orphan well program, we added a geologist that had been vacant for quite a while in southeast Michigan to address activity there. So again, our funding source will allow us, if there became more activity, say in northern Michigan, monitoring these long horizontals obviously takes more supervision than the shallow wells. Our geologists end up spending a lot more time watching over these because of the additional requirements of the instruction and the magnitude of these wells. We have a funding source that allows us, if we're concerned about us dropping the ball and not getting out to these sites enough, we have the funding mechanism and the ability to add additional full-time staff members to meet those.
He's still talking about that.
I have a question that I think it was one that Adam brought up. The question is, if we've peaked the production of gas, why are we in a hurry to exploit the rest? When he was talking about peaking, that means production of gas went up and peaked, and now it's on a decline curve, which means we're using up a lot of it. With the new shale gas, I think that's going to provide a significant portion of natural gas that we need, because we tend to use more and more energy to heat things, to run things. Natural gas is a cleaner fuel than coal, so we typically prefer that use rather than putting all the stuff in the atmosphere. Do you want to go any further on that one?
Well, these two questions go hand in hand. So, by its name, the DEQ is for protection of the environment, yet Section 2 of the Part 615, which is Supervisor Wells statute that regulates the oil and gas industry, requires favoring the oil and gas industry, which definition is closer to the truth. So these sort of run hand in hand in a way, but to answer the first question, peak oil in Michigan was about 1978. The peak gas was 1996. So if you look at a graph of these, I didn't put it up there, it's busy, but we've dropped off quite a bit. This goes to the staffing question too. We're down to about 1930 level of the number of permits. In the past, we ran anywhere from 600 to 1,000 permits a year for new oil activity. Our program is down. The number of wells that we applied for are down. Last year, we were about 185. And again, we haven't seen numbers that low since, I believe, the 1930s. We're not in a hurry to exploit the rest. The concept of, promoting, 615 promoting or favoring the oil and gas industry, there's this concept of waste, both surface waste and energy waste in our statutes, and it also includes the environmental waste. We are principally concerned with environmental waste, but oil and gas laws and mining laws are unique in the sense that they do have an extra dynamic where they recognize that minerals are mineral resources, whether it's oil and gas or metallics that Tom gets involved with. So from that standpoint, our statutes do look at the fact that if you waste them, but obviously it would be most environmentally protected to leave them in the ground and do nothing. That's the 100% most environmentally friendly thing to do. The world needs metals and the world needs energy. And to that extent, these types of statutes do, to that extent, promote the wise extraction of these that can be done in an environmentally sensitive way.
Have any fracking processes in Michigan been fined for illegal practices as their operations stopped? I'm not aware that there have been any fines levied on companies doing the high volume fracking here in Michigan.
That's a good question.
I've got one that, who decided that the DNR would hold these meetings? Actually, these meetings were being put on by the DEQ, and I typically go out with the DEQ all over the state and tell the leasing story, and then they tell the regulation story.
Please explain exactly what a deep injection well is and why it's necessary to isolate wastewater into them. This is WW. An injection well, again, is basically the same anatomy as an oil and gas well, but where an oil and gas well is meant for hydrocarbons to come up to the surface, the injection well, largely the same. It's constructed the same protection, cement, steel, perforations down in the zone that you want to dispose of. Michigan has these zones down deep that are already wet. Once you get down below 300 feet or so, And out of these freshwater aquifer resources, our water is salty, briny. It is not fresh water, it's not safe to drink. So down deeper in these formations, we have these wet zones that have the capacity to take a lot of water in a disposal fashion under low pressure without forcing it in under high pressure where you're really concerned about fracturing rock, for example. So that's why we monitor these pressures to make sure we're not approaching any maximum injection pressures. And, the reason is to get the energy out of the ground, you get a lot of associated produced brine water with it. You get the flowback fluid from the hydraulic fracturing. It's got to be disposed of somewhere. It's not practical to clean that up because of the salt content. So the way that it's handled around the world is they're disposed of back down disposal wells.
Question, why aren't the oil companies here to defend fracking? This meeting was basically set up by the DEQ as an informational meeting to explain our rules and regulations. I have participated as others in that division. We've been invited by municipalities, different interest groups where somebody from our division, potentially somebody against fracking, and somebody from Michigan Oil and Gas Association or an oil company have. But the purpose of this meeting was basically to present information about the rules and regulations for the DEQ here in Michigan. That's why the oil company's not here today.
Could you please repeat your name? I couldn't understand your name.
Bill Mitchell.
Bill Mitchell?
Yes.
Hi folks, I'm Mark Snow. I'm with the Permits and Bonding Unit as a unit supervisor there at Lansing. The question here, did the Excelsior wells in Kalkaska fail the Michigan Water Withdrawal Assessment Tool projecting adverse impacts on nearby streams and rivers? When we ran the tool up there, the watershed is a co-transitional watershed, and any large volume watershed or large volume water withdrawal in that type of watershed will automatically fail the tool and require site-specific review. So the answer to that question is yes, those withdrawals did fail the tool, and they're going through the site-specific review process right now. And the one thing we want to hit home with that too is that we're not going to allow any water withdrawals to take place that are going to create an adverse resource impacts through the running of that tool.
Has one ever been denied?
All the site-specific reviews have come back to proceed after running the tool.
It's never shown to deny one.
Yeah, after a site-specific review, they've come back to proceed. In all cases. Plus five. This is a question that I also received last night. I'll probably get it tomorrow too. And it's something I'm going to need some help with. It's according to the DNR, and one card says non-development, the other one says non-leasable. Lease classifications apply to blocks of land that are fairly undeveloped. What is the reason for the leasing of such lands along Sunset Trail near M52 to Encana? The question I have to know exactly is, where is this parcel? I need section township range type information so I can look at that. I think what it's talking about, the one talks about that it changed. Some of that change was because when we have an auction that's more than 125,000 acres, that's what the field can do for one particular auction. We do an auction every 6 months, we send it out to the field, they have a month to review parcels. 125,000 acres is what we consider to be max for them to do in that 30 days. We've had some auctions of 450,000 acres, and we had to come up with a plan to adjust for that because we can only look at 125,000. So what we did was we did an automatic leaseable non-development, no surface disturbance. And so those parcels have never been classified by most. They weren't classified at the time of the auction. They may have been classified in 1995 when we classified them all. So what we do is we go back and we classify those parcels. If somebody wants to do something, like in Canada, if they want to do something on that, drill a well or run a pipeline or anything else on that non-development, which is not allowed, they're not allowed to do that. For the automatic L&D parcels, they can do a classification, and that sounds to me like why this parcel got classified back as LDR or LD. But if you can give me the exact location, section, thousand frames, I can actually look that up and see what the thing is. So I'll have that ready for tomorrow night when I get asked.
I may tap Heidi to help me out with this question, but somebody spent a lot of time on this question. Look at the bigger picture. As a resident of Eggleston Township, where the county wastewater is located and it's polluting Black Creek, Thomas Solvent, Lakeway Chemical, both polluted my area. Why don't these companies put money in escrow like fracking companies to cover the cost of future cleanup? Every program is a little bit different with bonding. That's why I'll maybe kick it back to Heidi. But for office oil, gas, and minerals, we require companies to put up bonds so that if there's something that goes wrong, we have the ability to collect on that bond and cap that well, plug it, fill it, and be done with that well. We have an active company, we've got them on the hook to go after them for the cleanup. And we have the additional hammer, if you will, of using what we call holds permit. That gets the attention of oil company that want to do business in Michigan. If they've got environmental problems with us, we have the ability to put them on holds permit where they would not be able to get another permit. Now, if somebody is, doesn't care about doing more business with Michigan, they're on a shoestring budget, or this environmental impact is going to make them close up shop, well then obviously you don't have a lot of impact with it. And we have the ability to use some supervisor wells money, some of the money that I explained to you we have for our program. We can, if a company is defunct, we can get into those funds. If they're shown to be insolvent, then we can also tap our orphan well funds. But while we have a live company, obviously we want to go after them to make them take care of their own obligations. And I don't know how much if you could say about other DEQ programs.
I really don't have a good answer to that question. It's really legislative and regulatory in nature, but I will get an answer. And I think we're going to be posting some questions, so I'll try to get an answer for you.
Yeah, we're obviously going to get through all these questions tonight, but we have committed to, we're doing 3 of these meetings this week. We have committed to any questions that we don't get to. Last night there was a couple questions that the speaker had to say he didn't know the answer at that time. So we're going to take those questions and sort of the repeated questions that we can tell are on your mind. We'll go ahead and create a PDF for our website where we address those questions.
This one is regarding the application in Ravenna Township. It says if your rules are 1320 feet from a creek, why would Rosetta apply for a permit to drill a well at 1,057 feet in a creek that is supposedly a trout stream? And would the DEQ approve something like this? Tom had mentioned that on state leases they have setbacks from surface water bodies of a quarter mile. Part 615, the rules that regulate oil and gas drilling, that setback is less. They have to do a soil erosion control plan, maintain minimum setbacks from any kind of surface water body, and use engineering erosional controls so that sedimentation does not impact surface water bodies. So it is possible for a well to be located within the quarter mile of a surface water body. Companies have to use erosional controls so that sedimentation does not occur, and that is one of the things that when we go out to do the field review on a permit application that we check to verify distances and setbacks from surface water bodies. It's something that we're going to go out there and regularly inspect when they're drilling, and if the well is producible, to make sure that the surface water bodies are not impacted.
I have a question to your answer. If the creek is there and it's also a wellhead water protection area,
Yeah.
wouldn't that kind of create a problem?
There's no preconditions for oil wells to be set within wellhead protection areas. They can be put in within wellhead protection areas. There's nothing in the law that prevents oil wells from being drilled within wellhead protection areas.
But doesn't it state that the DEQ has to drill within that limit when there is a wellhead water protection area there?
There's nothing about wellhead protection areas. We have minimum setbacks from municipal public type 2 and 3 water wells and domestic water wells that are setbacks, but there's nothing in the rules that pertain or have restrictions on oil and gas drilling within wellhead protection areas.
Should there be?
You'd think so.
Seems like there should be.
That'll be one that I've written down here. We'll get more information on our answer sheet for you. We'll do that. I'll circle back around and take a look at the wellhead protection statute as well.
What did say you touch base on if they're going to get back later?
Wellhead protection area over here. He says there's no problem with that. Yeah, right.
Materials handed out claim that natural gas isn't clean, 3.6 to 8.0. Total volume shale gas escapes through venting or leaks. Is that true? State regulate air emissions. I think I hit this pretty good in my talk, but the EPA backed off this last week with their study. About a month ago, studies or articles came out alleging that the industry was losing large amounts of their product, which I have a hard time believing that they're interested in losing product if they can sell it. But we do, through the EPA requirements that are coming and the regulations that DEQ already has, we certainly look to minimize and capture those, even systems for vapor recovery as trucks are loading and offloading product. So a little bit extra with that. If the fracking is so safe, why are increasing numbers of insurance companies refusing to write insurance and mortgage lenders refusing to offer mortgages for properties that have fracking on or even nearby them? Those companies are objective businesses that base their decisions on facts. I don't know. We haven't had reports specifically from people that are having trouble with that. I'm sure that's something that the U of M study is going to look at, delving more into the socioeconomic impacts of hydraulic fracturing. So again, they're in phase 1. EPA study and Grand Institute study is going to be coming out with more information on that in the next year in 2014.
My question is, where do royalties off of state lands go, and what is the money used for? I sort of covered this in my presentation a little bit. The royalties that come off the state land, it goes to whatever the funding was for the parcel. If the parcel was like the tax burden parcel, which we own a lot of tax burden parcels, it used to go to the trust fund, now it goes to the state park endowment fund. For the parcels purchased with game and fish funds, it goes to the game and fish fund. So those funds would have more money to do different things with that they want to purchase lands or build hatcheries, that kind of stuff. And that's primarily where the money goes. Most of it now goes to the state park endowment fund.
Say it again.
What are noise light pollution standards? Oil and gas, when they're drilling, is 24/7, so that it's kind of like a city on itself. We have no light standards as far as pollution goes, but there's a limited time that they're out there. Noise, we have rules for, there are set decibel levels for a quarter-mile radius around any drilling and production sites. If there's any kind of noise complaints made, we're required to go out and investigate. And we do with, in particular, as an example, in the Grand Rapids, the Clearwater oil field back when a lot of those wells were put in, there were no houses around. We have minimum setbacks for wells can't only be drilled so close, installed so close to structures, while existing wells, houses can be built well within those setbacks. So we have pump jacks and facilities that are relatively close to homes, garages, right in the middle of neighborhoods. So anytime we get a complaint about noise, we are required to go out and investigate. We will call or meet with the property owner, and if it is warranted, we will contact the oil company and have them fix the noise, squeaks or rattles or whatever the case the equipment may be making. So there are standards for nuisance noises on production type facilities.
Do they have to follow the township ordinance on noise?
Yes.
No noise from 7 o'clock in my area, no noise from 7 o'clock in the morning.
I'm sorry. They have to still maintain, the townships have decibel levels too, that they're usually set on a decibel level, and so they would have to meet those types of restrictions.
Because the township has no say whether your permit is approved or not.
Correct.
So, but we do have say that they have to follow our ordinances.
Absolutely. The townships can have noise ordinances, they can have restrictions, not necessarily restrictions, but codes on truck traffic and the such. So companies have to follow those types of rules that are set by the township.
So, as a township official and residents, we do have some say.
Yes, you can't, basically the townships, local units of government can't regulate the oil and gas drilling and production type rules. We can't go anything contrary to that because that's a state law, but things that aren't covered with other Part 615, they can do things to regulate those types of aspects.
Fracking sites typically become unattractive industrialized locations, dotting many rural countryside settings. Does the DEQ mandate beautification of these raped areas? The oil and gas pads are typically anywhere from 3 to 8 acres during drilling. So there's a lot of activity. Those sites are typically leveled first thing by an excavator. Berms are pushed up. All the drilling activity goes on. If they have made a well, they'll do some beautification at that point as they equip the well. But ultimately, when the well is plugged, our requirements are that they return these sites to original grade and do vegetated. Beautification, I would say, is in the eye of the beholder. I mean, we don't have special landscaping requirements for anything other than that they restore it to contour and establish vegetation back there.
Why is the state selling mineral rights from public lands? We don't sell mineral rights. We're leasing the right, in this case, for developing oil and gas, or it could be metallic, non-metallic, underground gas storage. So we lease the land, we don't actually sell the right. And the reason we do it is because the companies ask us to do it. We're into the use of the state lands or the mineral rights, because not all lands can be used on site with non-development, but they can use the land to develop for the different industries because it's good for the economy, it's good for the state, brings money into the state, and we use a lot of energy for oil and gas. We use metallic minerals for all kinds of things. We use sand and gravel for roads. underground gas storage keeps us warm in the winter.
How deep were oil and gas wells in 1950? Why is the Ravenna well site proposing to go to a depth of 4,954 feet? Wells in 1950 and prior were drilled deeper, not necessarily the 5,000 feet, but advances in drilling. A lot of the older wells were basically drilled into shallower formations that may have been the first hydrocarbon-bearing units. A lot of, here in the Muskegon area, a lot of those wells were in the 1,500-foot deep range, plus or minus, set in the Traverse or Dundee formations, which are in the upper part of the rock column in Michigan, Devonian in age. So they were easier to drill into and extract the oil and gas. Back in the old days, when drilling first started, they were using what was called cable tools, which are still used today on rare occasions in the oil industry. A little more common in drilling water wells, but it's basically, as technology has advanced, depths to being able to drill have increased with that also. Lengths of horizontal holes, the depth, just the overall vertical depths that can be made. So in the early portions of oil and gas drilling, the cable tools, where they would sit on poles for weeks or months to get to 1,500 feet or 1,200 feet for a shallow oil well. Nowadays, that same depth of 1,500-foot well might take just several days from actual starting of drilling to complete. So it's basically an advancement in science, better exploration techniques, seismic data can give a better picture of the subsurface with a little more precision, so they can see different things. So it's a combination of things as to why wells are drilled deeper now than what they used to be.
Okay, we are unfortunately at 8:30 already. We really appreciate your attention tonight, your attendance, your thoughtful questions. And at this point, staff will be out in the lobby and would like to meet with you and answer any specific questions you might have. Do you want to raise your hand to be out answering questions? So there are a number of people here who can help with this. So thank you again for being here.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll be around for a little bit. I submitted a question to them that I never answered.
Okay.